Bullies push old janitor down. Big mistake. He was a former Marine. Ezekiel, Zeke. Thornfield pushed his wheeled bucket down the polished hallway of Riverside Preparatory Academy, the squeak of one stubborn wheel echoing off the lockers. At 62, he moved with a slight limp that most students attributed to age, though the truth ran much deeper. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle with surprising steadiness, and his steel-grey eyes missed nothing as they swept the corridors he'd been cleaning for the past 3 years. Riverside Prep housed Connecticut's most privileged students in red brick buildings with ivy-covered walls. The administration prided itself on tradition and excellence, but didn't advertise the hierarchy that emerged when entitled teenagers believed their wealth made them untouchable. Zeke had seen it all before. He kept his head down, did his job, and tried to stay invisible. Most days, it worked. "Watch where you're going, old man," came a sharp voice from behind him. Zeke turned slowly to see Broderick Ashworth III striding down the hallway with his usual entourage. Tall and athletic with perfectly styled blonde hair, Broderick carried himself like royalty, surveying his domain. His father sat on the school's board of directors, and everyone knew it. Flanking him were his constant companions, Trevor Blackstone, a stocky wrestler with a mean streak, and Madison Pierce, whose cruel tongue was sharper than any blade. "Sorry," Zeke mumbled, moving his bucket closer to the wall. "Didn't mean to block your path." Broderick stopped, studying the janitor with undisguised disdain. "You know what your problem is, Thornfield? You think you belong here, but you're just the help. You clean up our messes and disappear." Trevor snickered. "My dad says they only hired him because they needed to fill some diversity quota. Old veteran charity case." The words hit their mark, but Zeke's expression remained neutral. He'd learned long ago that rising to bait only made things worse. These kids didn't know the first thing about real conflict or what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. "I should get back to work," Zeke said quietly. "Yeah, you should," Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The bathrooms on the second floor are absolutely disgusting. Some of us actually have standards." They swept past him, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Zeke watched them go, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. In another life, in another place, disrespect like that would have consequences. But this wasn't a forward operating base in Fallujah. This was suburban Connecticut, and he was just the janitor. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Broderick and his crew took particular pleasure in making Zeke's job harder, knocking over trash cans, tracking mud through clean hallways, and leaving messes in inconvenient places. Always with that same smirk, always just believable enough to deny if questioned. In the faculty lounge, Zeke overheard conversations he wished he couldn't. Mrs. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, complained about vandalism in her classroom. Mr. Patterson mentioned missing equipment from the gym, but when fingers pointed towards certain students, the discussion always ended the same way. "Their families donate too much money. We can't afford to make waves." Zeke understood the politics. He'd seen similar corruption in other institutions, other places where power protected the guilty. But understanding didn't make it easier to swallow. The real escalation began on a rainy Tuesday in October. Zeke was cleaning the main stairwell when he noticed Broderick cornering Emma Rodriguez near her locker. Emma was quiet, studious, the kind of student who kept her head down and focused on her work. She was also one of the few people at Riverside who'd ever treated Zeke with basic human decency, always offering a smile and a genuine good morning when their paths crossed. "Come on, Rodriguez," Broderick was saying, his voice low but carrying enough that Zeke could hear from the stairs. "One date, my family's got connections at Yale, could be very beneficial for someone like you." Emma's voice was barely audible. "I told you, I'm not interested." "Not interested?" Trevor laughed. "You should be grateful someone like Broderick even notices you exist." Zeke's grip tightened on his mop handle. The wood creaked slightly under the pressure, a sound that would have been familiar to his old squad mates. It was the sound Sergeant Thornfield made right before all hell broke loose. But this wasn't Iraq. This wasn't his fight. He was just the janitor. Emma hurried away, her books clutched tightly to her chest. Broderick called after her, his words crude enough that Zeke had to force himself to keep moving. The boys' laughter followed Emma down the hallway like poison. That afternoon, Zeke found himself staying late to wax the gymnasium floor. The repetitive motion helped him think, helped him process what he'd witnessed. In the distance, he could hear basketball practice echoing from the main court. "Still here, old man?" Zeke looked up to find Broderick and Trevor blocking the doorway. Practice had apparently ended, and most of the building was empty, except for a few stragglers. "Just finishing up," Zeke replied, not looking away from his work. "You know," Broderick said, stepping into the gymnasium, "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about knowing your place." Trevor followed, his wrestler's build filling the doorway. "Some people just don't learn." Zeke straightened slowly, his back protesting the movement. "Is there something you boys need?" "Need?" Broderick laughed. "What we need is for you to understand that this school has an order, a hierarchy, and you're at the bottom of it." "I understand that," Zeke said quietly. "Do you?" Trevor stepped forward. "Because it seems like you've been getting a little too comfortable, walking around like you belong here, even talking to students like that Rodriguez girl." The mention of Emma sent a cold spike of anger through Zeke's chest. He kept his expression neutral, but something shifted in his posture. Years of military training had taught him to read situations, to assess threats, to prepare for violence even when hoping to avoid it. "I do my job," Zeke said. "I don't bother anyone." "But you are bothering someone," Broderick replied, circling closer. "You're bothering me. See, my friends and I have been talking, and we think it's time you learned your lesson." What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a car crash. Trevor moved first, stepping forward to shove Zeke backward. The older man stumbled, his bad knee buckling, and fell hard against his wheeled bucket. Dirty water splashed across the freshly waxed floor. "Oops," Trevor said with mock concern. "Looks like you've got more cleaning to do." Broderick joined in, kicking the bucket so it rolled away from Zeke's reach. "Maybe next time you'll remember to stay out of our way." Zeke pushed himself up slowly, water soaking through his uniform. His knee throbbed, and he could feel warmth where his palm had scraped against the floor. But it wasn't the physical pain that bothered him. It was the laughter, the same cruel laughter he'd heard in the hallway when they'd targeted Emma. "We done here?" Zeke asked, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "Oh, we're just getting started," Broderick said. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of Zeke on the floor. "This is going on social media. Maybe the administration will finally realize they need to upgrade their custodial staff." That night, Zeke sat in his small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, nursing his scraped palm and aching knee. The walls were sparse, decorated only with photos from his military service and a folded American flag in a display case. 24 years in the Marine Corps, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. He'd led men into battle and earned enough medals to fill a drawer. None of that mattered now. To the students at Riverside Prep, he was just the old janitor who cleaned up their messes. But as Zeke stared at those photos, at the faces of Marines who'd trusted him with their lives, something began to shift. He'd taken this job because he needed the work, needed the insurance, needed something to fill the empty hours since retirement. He'd accepted the disrespect because he thought it was the price of a quiet life. He'd been wrong. The next morning brought news that made his decision final. Emma Rodriguez wasn't at school. According to the whispered conversation Zeke overheard while emptying trash cans, Broderick had posted the photo of Zeke on various social media platforms with captions mocking both the janitor and Emma. The humiliation had been too much for the quiet girl, and she'd called in sick. For the first time in 3 years, Zeke didn't go straight to the janitor's closet when he arrived at school. Instead, he made a stop at the administration office. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Thornfield?" asked Mrs. Patterson, the school secretary. "I need to speak with Principal Morrison," Zeke said. "He's quite busy today. Perhaps I could take a message." Zeke looked at her directly, and something in his expression made her reach for the intercom without another word. Principal Morrison was a thin man with nervous energy who'd spent his entire career avoiding confrontation. When Zeke entered his office, Morrison barely looked up from his paperwork. "What can I do for you, Thornfield?" "We have a problem," Zeke said, taking a seat without being invited. "A student named Broderick Ashworth has been engaging in behavior that creates a hostile environment for both students and staff." Morrison's pen stopped moving. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation." Zeke's voice carried a tone of authority that Morrison had never heard from the janitor before. "Yesterday, he and Trevor Blackstone physically assaulted me in the gymnasium. They're also targeting a student named Emma Rodriguez." "Now hold on," Morrison said, finally looking up. "Physical assault is a very strong term. Are you sure it wasn't just some kind of misunderstanding?" Zeke reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, showing Morrison the social media posts Broderick had made. The principal's face grew pale as he scrolled through the images and comments. "This is concerning," Morrison admitted. "But Broderick's family, his family doesn't give him the right to assault staff or harass students," Zeke interrupted. "I'm filing a formal complaint. I expect action to be taken." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'll look into it. But these things take time, due process. We can't just..." "How much time?" Zeke asked. "Well, there are procedures, investigations. We need to be thorough." Zeke stood slowly, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Morrison's face. "You have 48 hours to address this situation. If nothing changes, I'll be contacting the school board directly and the local police." The authority in his voice, the calm certainty, reminded Morrison suddenly that this wasn't just some old janitor. This was a man who'd commanded Marines in combat zones, who'd faced down enemies that made entitled teenagers look like playground bullies. I understand," Morrison stammered. Zeke turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Principal Morrison? Emma Rodriguez is a good student who deserves to feel safe at this school. I hope you remember that when you're making your decisions." The next day, Emma was back at school, but the atmosphere had grown tense. Word of Zeke's meeting with Morrison had somehow leaked, and Broderick was furious. He cornered Zeke in the supply closet during lunch, his face red with anger. "You think you're smart, old man?" Broderick snarled. "Going to Morrison like some kind of tattletale? You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." Zeke continued organizing supplies, his movements deliberate and calm. "I did what needed to be done." "What needed to be done?" Broderick stepped closer. "I'll show you what needs to be done. My father already called Morrison. You know what happened? Nothing. Because Morrison knows which side his bread is buttered on." Trevor appeared in the doorway, blocking Zeke's exit. "You should have stayed in your lane, janitor." "Morrison can't protect you forever," Broderick continued. "And when he's not around, when there are no cameras, no witnesses, that's when you'll learn what happens to people who cross the Ashworth family." Zeke turned to face them both, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes that made Trevor take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of a man who'd seen real violence, real consequences, real war. But the moment passed, and Zeke was just the janitor again. "I need to get back to work," he said quietly. They let him pass, but their laughter followed him down the hallway. The breaking point came 3 days later. Zeke was cleaning the library after school when he heard voices from the computer lab next door. Through the thin wall, he could make out Emma's voice, high with distress. "Please, just leave me alone. I haven't done anything to you." "Haven't done anything." That was Broderick's voice, dripping with false innocence. "You got our friend here in trouble with Morrison. That's definitely something." Zeke set down his cleaning supplies and moved quietly toward the computer lab. Through the doorway, he could see Emma cornered near the back of the room, her laptop bag clutched defensively in front of her. Broderick and Trevor had positioned themselves between her and the exit. "We just want to have a conversation," Trevor said, cracking his knuckles, "about respect, about knowing your place." "I don't want any trouble," Emma whispered. "Too late for that," Broderick replied. "See, when people mess with our lives, we mess with theirs. Fair is fair." Zeke stepped into the doorway. "That's enough." All three teenagers turned toward him. Broderick's expression shifted from surprise to cruel delight. "Well, well, look who's playing hero now." Broderick gestured for Trevor to move closer to the door. "This is perfect, actually. We can deal with both our problems at once." "Emma," Zeke said calmly, not taking his eyes off the two boys, "walk toward me slowly." Emma started to move, but Trevor shifted to block her path. "I don't think so, old man. She stays right where she is." "This is between you and me," Zeke said, stepping further into the room. "Let her go." Broderick laughed. "You're in no position to make demands. In fact, I think it's time you learned what happens when the help gets uppity." He pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be perfect. Video evidence of the crazy old janitor attacking students. My father will have you arrested and sued into oblivion." Trevor moved first, rushing toward Zeke with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real opposition. He was strong, well-trained in high school wrestling, and 20 years younger than his target. He might as well have been attacking a granite mountain. Zeke sidestepped the charge with fluid precision, his hand shooting out to grab Trevor's wrist as the boy stumbled past. In one smooth motion, he twisted the arm and swept Trevor's legs, sending the wrestler crashing to the floor with a stunned grunt. "What the hell?" Broderick stopped recording, his face going pale. Trevor tried to get up, but Zeke's foot pressed firmly against his back, keeping him down without excessive force. "Stay down, son. You're not hurt, and I'd like to keep it that way." "You can't do this," Broderick shouted. "You're just a janitor. My father will destroy you." Zeke looked at him with the patience of a man who dealt with far more dangerous enemies. "Your father's not here right now. It's just us." Broderick pulled out his phone again, but his hands were shaking. "I'm calling security." "Good idea," Zeke agreed. "While you're at it, call Principal Morrison. Tell him I'd like to discuss that hostile environment we talked about." Emma had pressed herself against the far wall, her eyes wide with shock. She'd never seen anyone handle Trevor so easily, so effortlessly. The wrestler was strong enough to bench press twice his body weight, but he might as well have been a child in Zeke's hands. "How did you—" Broderick started to ask, then caught himself. 24 years in the Marine Corps, Zeke said simply. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. I've been in more fights than you've had birthdays, son. Most of them were with people trying to kill me, not spoiled children throwing tantrums." The words hit Broderick like physical blows. All his life, he'd used his family's wealth and influence as weapons, never considering that some people couldn't be bought or intimidated. He was facing a man who'd volunteered to run toward gunfire, who'd led other Marines through some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "Let me up!" Trevor struggled under Zeke's foot. "In a minute," Zeke replied. "First, we're going to have a conversation about respect, about how we treat other people, about what it means to be a man." "You're crazy," Broderick said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Maybe," Zeke agreed. 24 years of military service can do that to a person. Makes you value things like honor, duty, protecting people who can't protect themselves. Makes you less tolerant of bullies and cowards." He increased the pressure on Trevor's back just slightly. See, boys, I've been watching you for months, watching you make life miserable for anyone you think is beneath you, watching you torment a good student like Emma here because you think your daddy's money makes you untouchable. My father will have you fired, Broderick said, but the threat sounded hollow. Your father can try, Zeke replied, but I've got documentation of every incident, every assault, every act of harassment. I've got witnesses, and now I've got video evidence of you two cornering Emma in an empty classroom after school. Broderick looked down at his phone, realizing he'd been recording his own crimes. Here's what's going to happen, Zeke continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. You're going to delete that video. You're going to apologize to Emma, and you're going to leave her alone from now on. And if we don't, Trevor gasped from the floor. Zeke smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you'll discover what real consequences look like. See, boys, I may be just a janitor to you, but I've got friends. Friends in law enforcement, friends in the military, friends who take a dim view of privileged children who think they can do whatever they want. The room fell silent, except for Trevor's labored breathing. Emma watched in fascination as two of the school's most feared bullies were reduced to frightened children by a man they'd dismissed as harmless. Emma, Zeke said gently, not taking his eyes off Broderick, are you all right? She nodded, finding her voice. Yes, thank you. Good. Why don't you head home? I think these boys and I need to finish our conversation. Emma gathered her things and hurried toward the door, pausing to look back at Zeke with something approaching awe. Mr. Thornfield, thank you for everything. After she left, Zeke finally lifted his foot from Trevor's back. The wrestler scrambled away, his face red with humiliation and rage. This isn't over, Trevor snarled. Yes, Zeke said quietly, it is. Because if there's a next time, if you so much as look at Emma Rodriguez wrong, if you cause any more problems for the students or staff at this school, I will end your little reign of terror permanently. Broderick found his courage again, backed by a lifetime of privilege. You can't threaten us. We'll tell everyone what you did here. Go ahead, Zeke said. Tell them how two strong young men were overpowered by an old janitor. Tell them how you were cornering a female student in an empty classroom. Tell them how you've been harassing school employees. See how that plays with your classmates, with your parents, with college admissions officers. The truth of it hit them both simultaneously. They were the ones who'd look weak, who'd look like predators caught in the act. Zeke had turned their own tactics against them. What do you want? Broderick asked finally. I want you to be better, Zeke said simply. I want you to understand that real strength comes from protecting people, not hurting them. Real power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. He moved toward the door, then paused. You boys have every advantage in the world. Rich families, good schools, bright futures. Don't waste it all by being bullies and cowards. Be men instead. The next morning, news of the confrontation spread through Riverside Prep like wildfire. The story grew in the telling, becoming legend. Some said the old janitor had fought off 5 attackers. Others claimed he'd been a Navy SEAL. Trevor and Broderick, to their credit, didn't contradict the wilder versions. They seemed to understand that their reputations depended on people believing they'd lost to someone formidable. Emma returned to school with her head held higher. Students who'd never paid attention to her before nodded respectfully in the hallways. The quiet girl who'd been targeted by bullies was now the student who'd been defended by a hero. Principal Morrison called Zeke to his office again, but this time the dynamic was different. Morrison had heard the stories, had seen the change in the school's atmosphere. Broderick's father had indeed called, demanding action, but other parents had called too. Parents whose children had been targets, who were grateful that someone had finally stood up to the bullies. It seems you've resolved our problem, Morrison said carefully. The problem was bigger than just 2 students, Zeke replied. The problem was a culture that allowed them to act with impunity. That's what needed to change, Morrison nodded slowly. And it has changed. The boys have been different since yesterday. Quieter, more respectful. Good, Zeke said. That's all I wanted. In the weeks that followed, Riverside Prep became a different place. Broderick and Trevor didn't disappear. They were still wealthy, still privileged, but they were no longer untouchable. Other students had seen that bullies could be stopped, that someone would stand up for the targets. Emma Rodriguez flourished in the new environment. She joined the debate team, made new friends, and even started dating a boy from her chemistry class. When she saw Zeke in the hallways, she always smiled and said hello, and he always smiled back. Broderick eventually approached Zeke directly, finding him cleaning the gymnasium after basketball practice. The boy looked uncomfortable, uncertain, younger than his years. "Mr. Thornfield, could I talk to you for a minute?" Zeke paused in his work. "Of course." "I wanted to apologize," Broderick said, the words coming out in a rush. "For everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated Emma, all of it. It was wrong." Zeke studied the boy's face, looking for signs of deception. He found none. "Thank you," Zeke said simply. "That means a lot. I've been thinking about what you said, about being a man instead of a bully. I'm trying to do better." "Good," Zeke replied. "That's all any of us can do. Try to be better than we were yesterday." Broderick nodded and started to leave, then turned back. "Mr. Thornfield, were you really a Marine?" 24 years, Zeke confirmed. "Thank you. For your service, I mean. And for teaching me something important." As the boy walked away, Zeke allowed himself a small smile. Maybe there was hope for the next generation after all. The school year ended with Zeke receiving an unexpected honor. At the graduation ceremony, Principal Morrison called him to the stage to present him with a special recognition award for his service to the school community. The applause was thunderous, led by Emma Rodriguez and joined by students who'd never spoken to him but had witnessed his quiet courage. Standing on that stage, looking out at the sea of faces, Zeke thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the battlefields of Iraq to the hallways of Riverside Prep, the mission had remained the same. Protect those who couldn't protect themselves, stand up to bullies wherever they appeared, and never let fear determine your actions. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, accepting disrespect, trying to avoid conflict. But in the end, he'd learned that some battles couldn't be avoided, some stands had to be taken, and sometimes the quiet janitor in the corner was exactly the hero the situation required. As he walked back to his seat, Emma Rodriguez caught his eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Zeke nodded once, a gesture that carried all the weight of his years of service, his commitment to duty, and his belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. He was still just the janitor, still the man who cleaned up other people's messes. But now everyone knew that some messes required more than a mop and bucket to clean up. Sometimes they required a Marine.